Hi there, hope you're doing great today. Can you 1031 exchange into syndication? Before I answer this question, just a quick reminder that our videos are for educational and entertainment purposes only and do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. But before we dive into the question, I wanted to provide two quick refreshers. First of all, the 1031 exchange code within the IRS allows for an investor to roll over the gains from an existing property into a new property that they purchase. Typically, the exchange needs to be like for like, and this is a very key requirement that one needs to understand. Why? Well, let's recall what syndications are. That's where investors get together, they pool their money, and they purchase a property together. That property is held typically in an LLC, and the investors are members of the LLC that owns the actual property. As such, the investors own shares in the LLC, but do not own the property directly. While that may have other benefits and asset protection, it basically means that if you have a property that you own individually or in your own LLC and are looking to roll over the gains from that property into a syndication, that exchange would not be considered like for like. But the good news is that there is actually a way to accomplish that depending on the deal structure and the lead sponsor's willingness to work with you. There are a couple of key items to consider. First of all, the lead sponsor, depending on what your background is or what your experience is as an investor, in order for the lead sponsor to be able to take on 1031 exchange funds, they will have to set up a tenant in common structure that would allow you to come in with the LLC or whatever entity you have already set up. But depending on your background and experience, they may not be reluctant, or they may be reluctant to allow or give you control, because you don't want to be also in a situation, or investors, especially the passive investors, who don't want to be in a situation where they have the tail wag the dog. So those will be discussions that you'll probably have up front, and maybe even create a situation where you have a side letter that still allows the lead sponsor to retain the control rights in managing the property versus getting you involved. Now, I will also say you have to work very closely with your 1031 exchange advisor, with your attorney, the SEC attorney, as well as the tax advisor, because the IRS has some very specific requirements when it comes to these tenant in common structures. So you don't want to invalidate the 1031 exchange. So structuring that tick up front correctly, in alignment not only with the 1031 exchange requirements, but also with the IRS and tax requirement and legal requirement, is extremely important. Consideration number 2 to remember, because as a tenant in common member, you effectively become one of the managing team members of the entity. As such, the lender who is financing the deal may want to have a look at you, right? They may want to underwrite you, depending again on your level of ownership and control, which is why, again, very important to consider that up front. And if you're not willing, of course, to share your personal details and information, that's also something that you need to take into consideration. And last but not least, let's just say you're investing in a syndication today in a traditional manner, traditional format, not as a tick. When the deal matures or the deal reaches its intended hold period, if investors want to continue to stay with that sponsor, then collectively all members of the LLC may agree to roll over that existing LLC into a new investment, whatever investment the lead sponsor has curated. So that might also be an option. Very rarely do I see that, because syndications typically have multiple members, and naturally not everyone will agree. But alternatively, if the sponsor has a sense or information that a good chunk of LPs in the existing deal may want to stay and continue rolling over the gains so they don't have to worry about the big tax event when the deal sells, then they may even set up a tick entity for that group of investors up front and then roll over with some of the investors and not all of them. And anyway, a lot of these discussions, I say that because a lot of these discussions typically have to happen up front because that structure needs to be set up front. And it is extremely important that you work with an experienced support team, attorneys, a 1031 exchange, a qualified intermediary, tax advisor, CPA, and of course you and the lead sponsor to ensure that is done in compliance and with the optimal structure available. Given the size of these efforts and the additional time that may be required to set all that up, the lead sponsor would typically have pretty substantial minimum investment requirements. So the lowest I've seen is 500,000. In some cases it may be even $1 million, because it does take not only time but a lot of consideration and of course enhanced compliance that needs to be observed and maintained. So I hope you found today's video helpful, and if you did, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.